I'm going to quickly dive into a couple things, kind of introducing the idea of standing out to the crowd from the crowd. And then I'm going to tell you a couple of stories of things that I've been through in my sort of 30 years in this industry. And then each of our panelists are going to go through and do the same. Before I do that, how many people are either started a brand or thinking about starting a brand? How many are in the on-trade or bar side, distributor side, agency side? I see a lot of people raising their hands multiple times. You're like me. So you started a brand and you're on the agency side and you like to drink. Okay, good to know. All right. Before I dive into my piece, one of the things we're going to talk about today is, I don't know if you guys can read this, but this says, tradition, just because you've always done it that way doesn't mean it's not incredibly stupid. So, and that's the running of the bulls. And I'm not judging whether the running of the bulls is stupid or not. It is incredibly dangerous. But the point is that a lot of times people say, well, that's the way we've done it. And if people in this industry said that, then you wouldn't have the show that you have here. So it's pretty amazing. And I think that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about with standing out from the crowd. There's a very famous professor named Philip Kotler in America. He teaches at Kellogg Institute. He's written about 50 books. And he said, marketing is differentiation. To ignore this would be to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think the way we brought that over to this seminar today is that building a brand ultimately comes down to whether it can stand out in, reinvent, or create its own category. He also said that too much marketing today is what he said is 1P marketing, the traditional 4Ps. Companies mainly concentrate on promotion and sales and disregard product, price, and place and distribution, all of which are imperative if you want to stand out from the crowd. And because they do that, it results in ineffective marketing. So obviously, the traditional 4Ps, product, promotion, place, and price, somewhere in there, if you're a brand person like I've been for a very long time, brand encompasses all of this. I think the important thing to be thinking about, Philip Kotler said it, not me, is there are 4Ps. So if you're starting a brand or you're running a brand or you're thinking about something like that, you want to be looking at all 4 of these. And that's what you're going to hear from the panelists today, because each one of them has done different pieces of that in different brands. I think one of the interesting things about differentiation, though, that I've learned over the years, and it's been especially true as I've started my own brand, is that somewhere there's a balance and there's a watch out here between having nothing different and having everything be different. Because if everything's different, your trade, your consumers, even your distributors can't understand what it is that you're trying to sell or market. And so that's been a really interesting thing, like I said, even as not only for the brands I've worked on, so we like to call that familiar with a twist. So that's kind of an intro to the entire panel. I'm going to tell you guys a couple stories about brands I've worked on, and then each of the panelists will do the same. I have Deviate Marketing as well as Jardesca, which is my California aperitif. And when we started Deviate, we passed out the magic 8 balls. I don't, have you guys ever seen that toy? You ask it a question and you shake it and it tells you the answer. Well, in theory, it does. All we can really do is ask the right questions, and so that's what we're trying to do today. So I don't know if you've ever seen Mr. Peabody. You guys, that might be a very quintessentially American thing, but they have what's called the Wayback Machine. So we're going to go on the Wayback Machine for a minute. We're going to talk about gin many years ago. Gin 1991. Who was alive in 1991? I know there's some people that weren't. Oh, good. All right. So that's good. Because a lot of times when we do this talk, people are looking at me like I wasn't born yet. So I don't know if you noticed, there's a few gins here. Did you guys notice that? I think I stopped counting at about 50. But in 1991, gin was, you have to imagine a world where gin was in a round green bottle. It was juniper based. It was about the Union Jack and fundamentally British and English imagery, bowlers and old men, and really all the drinking was gin and tonic, nothing else. But along came this guy named Michel Roux. Anybody ever heard of Michel Roux? He's kind of an important guy in the industry. If you've never heard of him, he's kind of interesting to read up about. And he realized you could coat a bottle with a blue coating. And he had a brand called Bombay Original, which is still out there. And he decided to launch a brand called Bombay Sapphire. Well, Bombay Sapphire was square, and it was blue, and it wasn't juniper dominant, and it broke all the rules of gin, so much so that people were kind of saying, I don't really get what you're doing. The other thing was that it was vapor infused. So if you imagine boiled vegetables versus steamed vegetables. That's the best way to do it. So traditional gin is bathtub gin. It's boiled, right? They use vapor infusion. Well, the result of that was an incredibly light, delicate gin that wasn't like traditional gins. And because you had that light, delicate gin, their entire focus was martinis. And so it was amazing that all of the marketing was around martini. Now, how do people drink gin generally in the world? Anybody know the huge amount of consumption, what it's in? It's changed, but it's still the biggest amount. Gin and tonic. 80% of the consumption of Bombay Sapphire was gin and tonic. All of their imagery was martini. Everything they did was martini. They never did a gin and tonic ad. Why? Because everyone knows you drink gin with tonic. So why would you do a gin and tonic ad, right? So that's one of the things we're talking about with conventional wisdom. You don't need to tell people you drink gin and tonic. You need to tell people your product is so amazing that the only way you should drink it is in martinis. And all of their imagery and all their advertising was martinis. But it went better than that. It went into creativity. So anybody that was alive when Bombay Sapphire was not only in its heyday, but now understands that Bombay Sapphire isn't just a gin. It's a lifestyle brand. So much so that Bombay Sapphire could participate in the Salone di Mobile in Italy and have a stand of designer martini glasses from all over the world, and nobody looked at it and said, how can you be here? And I always thought, as the guy that was running Bombay Sapphire and I only did it for 3 years globally, but we had great growth and it was in the heyday of that. I always thought, what right do we have to be at the Salone di Mobile? And yet it was a lifestyle brand. And that was part of that challenging conventional wisdom. So you get the rational side and the emotional side. And then ultimately, and this is something you can do if you're working on a brand or you're starting a brand or something else, you lay out, remember we talked about all the 4 Ps? You put the 4 Ps out, you look at price, you look at promotion, whatnot. This is charting traditional gin versus Bombay Sapphire. And this is a great way for you to think about what your product and brand is doing versus what else is going on in the industry or the category. The result of that is this was gin. Remember, we're in 1991 and then 20 years later. That was gin from 1991 to 2007. That was the gin market. I know that's hard to believe now. If you think about what's happened in the gin in the past decade, that was Bombay Sapphire in the same time period. It doubled. It went to almost 2 million cases. And what's crazy is I haven't worked on Bombay Sapphire in over a decade, and I looked it up, and now it's knocking on 4 million cases. So it's pretty amazing when you get that differentiation right, that familiar with the twist, what you can do. The next one that I was going to talk about, and I'm going to do this one in just one very quick slide, but Grey Goose vodka, another fascinating story to me. Anybody know what the line was that Grey Goose was built on? Britt knows this. What was it, Britt?
World's best tasting vodka.
The world's best tasting vodka. What's the legal definition of vodka? Who knows? What is it? Tasteless, odorless, flavorless spirit. Tasteless, odorless, flavorless spirit. What was it built on?
World's best tasting vodka.
World's best tasting vodka. I got a great idea. You know why it worked? Because a guy named Sidney Frank, who created Grey Goose, had the guts and the wherewithal, who was an entrepreneur, yeah, he had a company behind him, to say, I'm going to build a brand in a category that is defined by colorless, tasteless, odorless spirit. I'm going to build a brand that is the world's best tasting vodka. And Bacardi bought it from Sidney Frank for $2.2 billion. Actually, it was more than that because there was an earn out on the end. So it was probably $2.5 billion or something. But if you think about challenging conventional wisdom, vodka is cheap. A premium vodka is like $20. It's from Russia and Poland. It's made out of potatoes. It's cold. It's not warm. And you're going to go to distributors and give them about 15% margin, maybe 20. Colorless, tasteless, odorless. Grey Goose, well-made, luxury. It went out at 30, came from France, wheat, approachable imagery, and they decided to go to distributors with higher margins, which is all part of the standing out, all the way through the 4 Ps, right? The other interesting thing about Grey Goose, and this is important for all of you in a show like this, is it was a failure for the first 3 or 4 years. They relaunched it twice. So for all the people that want to go back and talk about how wonderful Grey Goose was, and after a decade, Sidney Frank sold it for $2.2 billion, they went through all the same things every entrepreneur goes through, which is, can we make this work? We got to redo it. The last one that I'm going to talk about real briefly is my brand that I created called Jardesca California Aperitiva. I wouldn't be a brand guy if I didn't have the bottle here to show you. So this is Jardesca. It's a California aperitif. We did the same thing when we were launching Jardesca. Obviously, many of you are from Europe. You know what aperitifs are. Americans do not really know what aperitifs are. They're finally starting to get it. Traditional aperitifs, a lot of them use artificial flavors and colors. They weren't all natural. They tend to be now mass-produced. They aren't small. They've been around for hundreds of years. A lot of them use secondary or burnt wines, right? So the leftover wine. The traditional aperitifs, that's how they made them and made them cost-effective, and it was a way to actually create aperitifs. They also add grain spirit or flavored syrups, cane sugar, and they're primarily cocktail ingredients. And in Europe, it's a pre-dinner moment, right? That's where everybody drinks aperitifs. The real takeaway is we decided to create a quintessentially Californian style aperitif. So fresh, refreshing, all natural, wine-based, a marriage of the vineyards and the gardens. We blend 3 California wines with a botanical enlivened spirit, completely differentiated from the traditional European aperitifs. But this is familiar with a twist. How do people drink it? What's the global basis of aperitifs now? It's the spritz is on fire. So we do the Jardesca California spritz. The difference is that we use fresh combinations of garnishes that really react with Jardesca because it's so natural. And the result for us has been the same kind of response that we would have written if we could when we were starting Jardesca, which is, this is summer in a glass, balanced dry, and inspired by the sense of summer. It's high time for a local alternative to French aperitifs and other aperitifs. So the good news is we got out there, exciting differentiation. I'll still say as an entrepreneur, you got to stick in there because that's why I told you about Grey Goose, right? And Bombay Sapphire is a whole different story, but Grey Goose, again, was like, how long is this going to take?